The CEO of Sport Integrity Australia has announced he'll be standing down in early August. David Sharp was a former Assistant Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police before becoming CEO of Australia's anti-doping agency ASADA back in 2017. In 2020, that was rolled into the powerful new integrity body. And former Federal Sports Minister, Senator Richard Colbeck, appointed Sharp as the founding CEO of the new agency, with expanded powers. It had a full range of extensive responsibilities, from anti-doping to match manipulation, safeguarding and protection. In a statement just released, Mr Sharp has not offered any reasons for his resignation, instead opting to praise his staff for their passion and commitment each and every day. He also recognised the role sports themselves have played in committing to the National Integrity Framework. Former Sports Minister Richard Colbeck said David Sharp has done an incredible job in 4 years working tirelessly to build an integrity agency that has become the envy of the world. And managing to get initially resistant stakeholders on board and earning their trust was also a significant milestone. That resulted in two of Australia's highest profile sports reaching out to the agency for their independence and authority in conducting separate investigations. One into the AFL's controversial illicit drug policy, another into Football Australia's historic abuse allegations in women's football. The current Sports Minister, Anika Wells, is yet to release a statement, but a short time ago I spoke to the Chair of Sport Integrity Australia's Advisory Council, Sarah Kenny, who is a Vice President of World Sailing. So, first of all, what's your reaction to the news that you'll now be looking for a new CEO?
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, look, I guess initial reaction is, somewhat sad, I guess, because it's been such a pleasure to work with David. He really is a consummate professional when it comes to integrity in sport. He brings a deep knowledge and understanding of both integrity and sport, and particularly with his, law enforcement background, he's really navigated some very tricky issues. So, I've really loved working with him, and the council's loved working with him, and we will definitely miss him. It's sad. I wish we'd had a little bit longer with him, but completely understand that for him the time's right, and time to move on.
Would you describe it, Sarah, as a position that is, of course, it's incredibly grueling and it's non-stop, but in many ways it's a thankless task because you can't really talk about your successes and what is perceived as failures in the public. There might be another side to that story that can't be discussed. I mean, it's very difficult having all of this stuff put together when there's a lot of policing stuff, when you're talking about anti-doping and, match fixing, those sorts of elements, illegal gambling. Then you've also got, the care and the abuse and the other side of sport, which is a big side of sport, but probably requires something other than policing. It's a fraught, big, bulky job.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. It's definitely thankless. And I think that's a lot of roles in sport, because no one really ever thanks you when you're doing the job, but you hear all about it when people think you're not. We've got a very diverse group of stakeholders, and they're all very different. And there's actually no one-size-fits-all solution for most of these integrity issues. So, it's an immense challenge. So you absolutely need to be very resilient to deal with all of that. And the issues are complex and ever evolving. And I think what we find in sport, and I've found this across numerous roles in sport, people have a little bit of the information, but they think they actually have all of it. And then, they're forming views and judgments based on that little bit. And that's understandable because, as you said, often we can't share a lot of the detail, and particularly as a sort of regulator and an enforcer in relation to anti-doping, we're absolutely bound by confidence, and we can't correct the narrative or what the media has cottoned onto or what the athlete chooses to sort of talk about. So it is absolutely thankless. And the range of issues that sport integrity is responsible for is vast, and they're all quite different. I think often related, and maybe, there's some tweaking to do in terms of some of those functions. But overall, I think, what has been achieved in a very short space of time with a complex brief could not have been done but for someone like David, heading up the agency.
I know that the Australian model and Sport Integrity Australia is well regarded internationally, but you also have a global hat as a Vice President of World Sailing. Where do you think we sit in that global model, and what is it that the rest of the world looks at when they see us?
Yeah, look, and I think the other key thing in the history is we had the Wood Review, which really sought to try and uncover, what was happening in sport and what the issues were and how we should address them going forward. And, the government accepted just about all of those recommendations and then needed to find a way to implement them. And, SIA was one of the reasons, or the Wood Report really was one of the reasons why SIA was established, to provide, an avenue to actually deliver upon some of those recommendations. But I don't think there's any doubt that we are recognised as, certainly best practice, if not world leading in integrity. We are very well represented through various individuals connected with the agency and the Minister herself on wider bodies and committees and panels and other integrity agencies. We have a very, very strong network in law enforcement around the world, which can be very important on some of the corruption and match fixing type issues and some of the gambling issues. I don't think there's another country that has this exact model, but we get inquiries every week from countries seeking, our guidance into how they could set something up. We've seen lots of talk about setting something similar up, and months, if not years later, very little's happened in some of the very developed nations that are looking to try and achieve what sport integrity has achieved. So I think it is very well regarded, and we speak up too. Sometimes in sport, people don't want to ask the hard questions, and I think recent issues have shown where it's appropriate, we will ask the hard questions, and that's really important in integrity in particular in sport.
Yeah, integrity is a difficult one, and we can have a whole other discussion about that at another time, because it's also so open to interpretation. And I guess, many people interpret it depending on where they sit in the tree, whether they're at the bottom and they're the athletes that feel hard done by, or whether you're at the top and you're in governance and people see you as having all the power and the structures supporting you. So going forward, it doesn't take long when someone resigns or moves on. The next person has to come in and the focus switches almost immediately to what is going to be required there. So what sort of a person will come in? What kind of tweaking to the system do you think needs to happen next? What's the future?
Look, I think we are extremely fortunate that one of the things David has done very well is build a strong senior leadership team around him. And we have some excellent, excellent staff. And that is not always easy to do in an agency like this, where particularly in the early years, we didn't have sustainable funding, and, its role wasn't all that clear for people. And the subject matter is actually quite complicated. But there's a really strong team who are sitting there, and whether a candidate comes from within or whether they're supporting a new CEO, I think we are very well positioned for that to be seamless. In terms of what's required, there's no doubt you have to be resilient, and you need to understand sport. It is like no other industry in my experience. There's a lot of emotion. As I said, you've got a very diverse mix of stakeholders. The problem's different for each national sporting organisation. You need to have deep empathy with sport and with athletes, and you need to understand that we have to be flexible. And you also need to have a willingness to listen, be very patient, because it's hard to get this right. There isn't a solution that's going to be right for everyone, and we're constantly adapting and trying to improve, even in the most sort of established function, which is the anti-doping. I mean, there's nothing exact about that, and things evolve all the time, and you need to constantly keep ensuring that, your own processes and procedures are actually best practice and ready for the next thing that's going to hit. So, yeah, I think it's quite a complex ask for someone to come in. But, particularly, I think if you understand sport and like David, if, integrity is a key part of how you operate, you're going to be well positioned to do the job.
Well, we don't know what he's going to do next. I would assume a long holiday to wash a fair bit of it out of the system. Yeah, exactly. But as you say, this is a particular kind of frame that is constantly shifting and growing and changing, and pressures come from all sorts of different areas. Sarah, thank you very much for your time, and all the very best for the future.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tracy.